The morning rain fell softly against the hospital window, tracing delicate lines down the glass like fragments of forgotten memory. Inside, the room was hushed except for the hum of machines and the steady rhythm of a heart monitor, proof that life, though fragile, still lingered. James sat quietly by the bedside, his shoulders heavy, his eyes fixed on the pale face of the woman he loved. To anyone passing by, he might have looked like a man in prayer. His hands, calloused from years of building homes, now trembled as they rested beside hers, hands once full of warmth and laughter. Too deep had always been the light in his world. Her laughter had a way of softening even the hardest days. Her eyes, deep and alive, once carried the fire that drew him in the first time they met. But now, that fire had dimmed. The fever had come suddenly, a night of exhaustion followed by days of delirium and unrelenting heat. The doctors called it a severe viral infection, one that sapped her body and clouded her mind. For James, it felt as though the world he had built brick by brick with her was crumbling in silence. He hadn't left her side since the ambulance doors closed. Days blurred into nights, hours lost their meaning. He whispered to her about their dreams, the house they had planned near the rice fields, the laughter of little Nhi echoing through their mornings. Sometimes he thought she could hear him. Her fingers twitched, her lips moved faintly, as if her soul was trying to find its way back to him. When Deep finally opened her eyes, the world seemed to stop. James rose instantly, his breath caught halfway between relief and disbelief. But her gaze didn't soften with recognition. It froze him instead. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice fragile yet sharp enough to break something inside him. The doctor later explained, temporary amnesia, perhaps partial, perhaps permanent. Some memories might return. Or none at all. James heard nothing else. Just the echo of those three words, "Who are you?" That night, as the corridors emptied and the hospital lights dimmed, James sat beside her bed. The rain whispered outside, soft but endless. He held her hand gently, his thumb tracing small circles against her skin. "I'm still here," he murmured. "Even if you forget me, I'll help you remember." In that quiet promise, born from heartbreak and hope, something eternal took root. Weeks of waiting. Days turned into weeks. The doctors urged him to rest, but James refused. How could he leave the one person who had been his reason for everything? Physically, Deep grew stronger, though her eyes often drifted through him, searching for something she couldn't name. She looked at him the way one might look at a stranger who feels strangely familiar. Each glance was a small ache, a mixture of nearness and loss. Every morning, James brought her fresh white lilies, the flowers she once said smelled like peace. He told her stories about a girl who loved jasmine tea, who danced in the rain, who dreamed of a small house with a garden. Deep listened with quiet curiosity. "You talk about her as if she's still here," she said one morning. "She is," James replied softly. "In every way that matters." She smiled politely, not realizing the girl in his stories was herself. Sometimes she asked, "Why do you care so much for that girl?" "Because," he said with a faint smile, "she taught me what love means." He didn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Love, he knew, couldn't be forced back by words. It needed time to find its own way home. He rebuilt their world gently, taking her for walks in the hospital garden, playing her favorite songs, hoping that maybe, just maybe, her heart would remember what her mind could not. People whispered that he was foolish, that love could not survive in one memory alone. But James believed otherwise. Love, he thought, doesn't need to be remembered to exist. It simply is. Whispers from the past. One golden evening, as the sun slipped behind the hospital, Deep looked at him and said quietly, "When you tell those stories, I feel warm inside." "I don't know why." James smiled, his voice barely a breath. "Maybe your heart is remembering for you." That night, he sat beside her as she slept, surrounded by the faint scent of lilies and the hum of quiet hope. He knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for her, he would walk it again and again. Because love, he realized, isn't about being remembered, it's about staying, even when you are forgotten. Echoes of a forgotten life. Deep's recovery was slow but steady. Soon, she could walk on her own, breathe in the fresh air, and smile without pain. Yet something remained missing, a silent void that tugged at her heart. Then one afternoon, as she wandered through the hospital garden, a stranger approached. He was tall, composed, his suit too crisp for the surroundings. "Min," he introduced himself. "A friend of James." He handed her a bouquet of flowers. "You were very special to him." "Was I?" she asked, uneasy. Min hesitated. "He doesn't tell you, does he? About what happened before you lost your memory?" His words lingered long after he left. What happened before? Why did James hide it? The next morning, she asked him directly, "Who was I to you, James? Before all this?" James paused, his expression unreadable. "You were someone who changed my life," he said quietly. But she could hear the pain behind his calm. He was protecting her, from the truth, or from the past, she didn't know. Min began visiting more often, showing her pictures, taking her to places he claimed she'd once loved. He spoke easily, while James lingered in the background like a shadow, always present, never demanding. Yet every time she saw him, her heart ached. His silence spoke louder than anyone's words. The return of memory. Late one night, sleepless, Deep walked alone into the garden. The moonlight painted silver paths across the grass. She paused where James had once wheeled her chair, whispering stories of their love. Suddenly, flashes returned, rain, laughter, promises beneath the stars, his arms around her as her fever broke. James, she whispered into the night, but he wasn't there. He was standing a few steps away, watching quietly, afraid that stepping closer might shatter her again. He saw the confusion and longing in her eyes, and it tore him apart. Even if you never remember me, he thought, I'll wait until your heart does. The moment of return. The first rain of spring came softly, carrying the scent of renewal. Deep stood by her apartment window, watching droplets race down the glass. Her heart felt heavy, with questions, with something close to sorrow. Weeks had passed. Min had stopped visiting, but James still came, always kind, always steady. She noticed how tired he looked, how quietly he carried his exhaustion. Each time he left, the silence grew louder. That night, while sorting through the small box of belongings the hospital had returned, Deep found a silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph, her and James laughing by a river, sunlight dancing on their faces. Tucked inside was a folded note, yellowed by time. If one day you forget me, I'll make you fall in love with me all over again. Her breath caught. The words broke something open inside her. Memories flooded back, his voice, the storms, the nights he held her hand when she was too weak to breathe. James, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, she ran into the rain, barefoot, breathless, desperate. She found him where their story began, in the old hospital garden, beneath the tree that had sheltered them both. He turned, eyes wide, as she threw herself into his arms. I remember, she cried. I remember everything. The rain, the songs, our promises, you never left me. James held her close, his tears mixing with the rain. I told you, he whispered, voice breaking. I'd help you remember. She looked up, her eyes shining. You did more than that. You loved me enough to wait. The rain softened into mist. The world seemed to hold its breath. Around them, lilies trembled in the wind. In that moment, they weren't the same people who had lost each other. They were two souls who had found love again, proof that memory may fade, but love endures. Let's start again, Deep said softly. Not from the past, but from now. James smiled, a smile that carried both an ending and a beginning. And as the rain fell gently around them, time itself seemed to pause, watching love remember what life had tried to make it forget. Reflection. Their story reminds us that love is not bound by memory or circumstance. James's quiet devotion proves that real love doesn't demand recognition, it simply endures. Too Deep's journey teaches that even when the mind forgets, the heart remembers what truly matters. Love, at its purest, doesn't need to be remembered, it only needs to be felt.